I'm going to introduce, it's a really great pleasure to introduce Professor Ezio Micelli, that we will talk about heritage and innovative city regeneration. And so the stage is yours.
Okay, let me, since I have the privilege to talk as, not the first one, I can reconnect some elements of my presentation with some very interesting points that I've heard through the first presentations. First, I heard a connection in the very first presentation, in the very first speech, between industria, cultura y naturaleza. I thought that was very interesting perspective, because normally we think these elements totally disconnected. And all of a sudden, we have this perspective to put together elements that should be and must be recombined. In your presentation, I've heard very interesting perspectives concerning a bottom-up approach linked to the peripheries of Europe. So we have to foster and we have to promote a movement from the bottom, so that economic and social growth is not just the result of a top-down approach. We have to think about that. And I heard with so much interest the idea that we are going to end up with hybrid spaces, hybrid practices. And this was the case of this vision of Palermo that I thought was so interesting in Maurizio Carta's presentation. So I'm trying to add some elements to these three very interesting elements that I've heard through the first presentation, working on somehow different approach in which I will try to mix economics and spatial and physical planning. A very first element must be specified, because it's rather peculiar, not only of the Italian case studies, but also of a very widespread situation throughout Europe concerning a specific space of Europe in which growth development is not anymore the key word, because we are not talking about rich and growing metropolitan spaces, but we are talking about somehow lagging territories that do not know that capacity of growth that really affect London, Paris, Berlin, and the other metropolis of our continent. So what did it happen? What's going on right now in so many spaces throughout Europe? And I will talk about an anecdote that I think is very interesting in order to understand what has happened throughout Italy in these recent years. This is a firefighters' barracks in Ferrara, wonderful city, not a tiny city, 100 sort of 1,000 inhabitants in Emilia-Romagna, a wealthy region of the north and center of Italy. And the administration tried so many times to sell these barracks, because they want to convert a real estate asset that you did not use anymore into financial resources. They badly needed some new financial resources. They wanted to sell this real estate asset. Too bad that the market after 2008 changed profoundly. So actually they tried to sell again and again, but the sale was not effective. And all of a sudden, this real estate asset just remained totally void. And there, something happened. And a self-organized group led by an art curator, decided that was the time to occupy this space, to promote and to foster a new wave to develop the city wealth and the city development. So all of a sudden, society from the bottom occupies void spaces that are not anymore of interest for developers, for investors, for the real estate economy. And that has been not the case just for Ferrara, but for so many cities throughout the country. And that was a very powerful change, not related just to a very short-term economic moment, but related to a very profound and deep change in our economy. Actually, I would like to just to show you how powerful has been the change. This is a graph in which you can see the number of building permits that have been released by public administrations in a century. And as you can see in the slide, as you can see in the chart, you are going to see that the number of building permits that are released and the number of 2013 is rather pretty much the same of these recent years. The amount of building permits that have been released during the 30s, but just a whole different world. The Italy in the 30s, I remind you, there was an empire. We had some colonies. I mean, there was a totally different world. And so something has deeply changed, and I do not want to enter this part of the reasoning of my arguments, but profoundly, the economy has changed. Profoundly, Italian demography has changed. And that is not the case just of my country. If I think about the Eastern Bloc, used to be called Eastern Bloc countries, perhaps we're going to see very much the same figures, very much the same trends. So actually, due to this profound change, we have to deal with a large amount of real estate assets that are completely void, with no use, and we have in front of us this bottom-up movement that is there in order to promote a different way of create wealth, to create social and economic development. Well, the story is connected also to an intense debate concerning the very nature of this real estate asset category. And I would say that there is a great debate on the topic, but it's interesting to see that a new conceptual framework has been developed. I'm going to talk just 1 second on this emerging category, the commons, that has been used probably not properly in juridical terms, but really with a deep conceptual link to a political reasoning. So I would like to say that there is this cultural and political space concerning this third class, not private goods, not public real estate assets. In the middle, we have this new category that is still in the way to be correctly and precisely defined. Well, I would like to stress my presentation on 3 points. The first one is concerned by the concept of participation, because we are seeing just this very important movement bottom up in the cities, in the rural territories, in which we have this community that is willing to promote a different way to conceive and to actually promote growth. Participation is a concept that we used to know in a different way. Participation used to be a very different way to promote a different political agenda. I think this picture is so powerful in promoting a different idea of participation. We have to consider here different case study. We are not in the north of Italy, we are in the very south of Italy, we are in San Vito dei Normanni, an abandoned industrial plant has left an opportunity for the community that is willing to recreate a social and economic hub in order to promote social innovation, economic development hub. And all of a sudden, we can see from this very picture that participation is no longer an activity concerned with a more precise, more articulated political demand. We are not interested anymore in just saying to political parties, institutions, hey, you should do that, you should that else, you should complete your political vision. Now, here we have self-organized group requesting spaces in order to foster their initiatives, to foster their projects. Just a completely different approach in which intentional communities start to be the protagonist in the public scene, in the public arena. So participation just changes into its DNA and becomes something radically new, in which public administration is not there in order to complete the welfare design. It's there to say, okay, I will make space to your project. Right? Just the very different approach from the past. This political, new political and cultural scene can be considered into a very interesting perspective if we can see that we have common goals, groups, but also very personal perspectives and agenda. In this case, we have this beautiful scene in which a dancer, they used to dance at the La Scala Theater in Milan, comes back to San Vito dei Normanni and wants to engage the community, so to teach the community how to dance. And she says, okay, I will not be a great dancer, but I will teach all my co-citizens how to dance, and promotes this idea of welfare subsidiary activity in the San Vito dei Normanni formerly abandoned industrial plant. So individual projects, collective agendas into this new idea of participation promote a totally different perception, how a community demands and engages the political power, the institutions. Second dimension is related to the figure, the very nature of this social entrepreneur. It's very interesting that we consider a case study well known in Milan. In this case, a group of abandoned buildings were refurbished by a social entrepreneur. Why social entrepreneur? Because this person states clearly, I'm not interested only in profit. I have to make my money. I need to have resources that balance the expenses that I have to sustain. But I'm very engaged for the benefit and for the success of my community. My agenda is not only to make money. My agenda is to live together into a community. That's a rather ideological approach, but in economic terms, is to create a new set of goals that enrich the only one purpose that only is ascribed to the entrepreneur. Profit is not the only one rule. Profit is interesting in limited terms, but the benefit of a community is pretty much the goal that I would like to associate to the sustainability of my initiative. So actually, all these entrepreneurs that have been identified not only in Italy, but also into a wider perspective, and I think about the researches carried out in the UK, for instance, that pointed out the existence of this new actor playing in the urban scene is very interesting, because we have this mixed figure, an activist that is also an entrepreneur. It's very interesting because public administrations are there just to handle just two types of economic actors. They know how to deal developers, private investors, and they know how to deal with association, just pure benefit association. Here we have a subject, an economic actor that mixes the idea of creating wealth, creating an activity that has resources, that has revenues, and in the same time, this idea that the spectrum of the activity has to deal with the well-being of the entire community. It's very interesting because administrators really do not know how to handle this situation. And even in juridical terms, they have to face a new, totally new approach in which they have to identify a third way in which to approach these new figures, these new actors. In this picture, just a very interesting picture, because there is this association that wanted to create, you know, a way to make to have resources, and so they used to have public performances. Here is the video creation of a very well-known band in Italy, Negro Amaro, and they had money. But for the administration, we are here in Novara in an abandoned building, and the administration could not tolerate. They had revenues, and they had the opportunity to create new revenues throughout this cultural activity. That was just disturbing. That was just something very difficult to handle. Let's go to the third issue, because here we have a very clear connection to what has been said in the very first presentation. There is a connection between what's going on in these venues and culture. Actually, so many of these initiatives are related to culture. Here we have the Teatro. We are back in Ferrara, totally different initiative. A self-organized group of citizens want to restore an ancient and abandoned theater. They reopen the facilities, the venue. They just recreate the possibility to have public events, and culture is at the very center of the goals, of the focus of this initiative. Nevertheless, I would like to connect culture to other activities, because it's very interesting that in the not only in the Italian economic scene, but I would say throughout Europe, culture is becoming art are becoming a potential important driver of value. And in these venues, you can see that physically. Here is just a representation with a very specific production of plates has been designed for top restaurants throughout Italy, is enriched by an artist that cooperates with the firm in order to add value with the contribution of an artwork. And that happens in abandoned casern that the administration wanted to sell. The sale never ended up. And so we had this new hybrid ecosystem in which artists, entrepreneur, led by a social entrepreneur close to Vicenza in the north of Italy, recreated a new hybrid space in which culture, art are added to manufacturing productions. And that is just a new way to consider the drivers of value. This is very, this is a very stimulating and controversial issue. Books about that, in particular in the French sociology school, are very interesting and detailed on that. But let me go back to another example. Here we are close to Venice, into an abandoned site, military barrack. There's abandoned. Obviously, the sale never ended up. A self-organized group, puts together different economic actors. Here we have a stylist that wants to promote a défilé, and all of a sudden they discover that an old barrack can be the site for an interesting défilé. Here we have the images. Let me go to final considerations. Because here, once again, I would like to recognize my reasoning to Maurizio Carta's reasoning, in particular, when he says no more master plan. Actually, we are accustomed to this kind of zoning design, in which we have this idea that technicians and political institution in general decide ex ante what is going to be the city in the future, in the remote future, and in the short-term future. Every single parcel is perfectly designed. There's going to be a certain amount of square meters. There's going to be that function and not that function else. Well, actually, we have to think that this idea of zoning is not anymore at all radically the way in which we have to think the development of this type of development, bottom-up, hybrid, in which probably we have to think that planning just triggers a social change, social innovation. We are not going to define ex ante what is going to be such a change, such an innovation. We just promote it, and we are going to see what happens. And our issues are going to be related to how to measure, how to evaluate, how to assess all this important amount of changes, innovation. And we are going to learn, and we're going to redefine the rules of change and the rules of the social and economic innovation. Just, an image. In this case, we have an abandoned barrack, industrial barrack, that was just in the very heart of Milan. And it's very interesting because Base Milano has been a very important case study in which a community, a self-organized community, first has just promoted a very interesting regeneration site in which you have hybrid activities going from subsidiary welfare activities to industrial and economic activities. Well, all of a sudden, we see this place changing through decades. It was something some years ago. It is something different now. We have just to accept the idea that through time, something will change. We are not scared about that. Planning in such a perspective is not obsessed by the final state of the places. It's just obsessed by the idea that planning is capable of triggering change, is capable of triggering social innovation. I think that's a very radical change, a very important new perspective to get accustomed with. Thank you very much.